Hey everybody! In this video we're going to take a look at St. Justin Martyr. And as you may have gathered from his name, his martyrdom story is one of the most famous and celebrated of the early church. Now, Justin Martyr is the preeminent member of the class of early Christian writers called the Apologists. So, the earliest category of Christian writings, obviously, is the 27 books making up our New Testament, most of which were written by the apostles and their associates within a few short decades of our Lord's resurrection from the dead. The next category after the New Testament is what's called the Apostolic Fathers, which includes writings by men who knew the apostles. So the time period on that is maybe from the 60s AD for the earliest parts of the Didache on to the early middle decades of the 2nd century, or 100s. The martyrdom of Polycarp, which we talked about in the last video, falls into the category of the Apostolic Fathers. The Apologists is the category of early Christian writings that comes after the Apostolic Fathers. And these are writers and documents spanning from the 120s AD up to about the year 180. And they wrote in Greek and are best known for composing apologies for the Christian faith. And that's not apology as in apologizing for what we believe in. This is apology as in apologetics, explaining the faith and defending it against outside attack. And in the 2nd century, boy was the Christian faith under attack, with vicious lies being spread about us in every quarter. Warning, those of you with young children may want to skip ahead to this timestamp. It's about to get a little explicit. So, for instance, people knew, it was common knowledge, that Christians gathered together early in the morning on Sundays for what they called agape feasts, right? Love feasts. And at these feasts, people knew that Christians partook of the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ, the man Christians worship. And people knew that Christians called each other brethren, right? Brother and sister. So this is how the enemies of the church put those facts together. They said what Christians actually do behind closed doors at their secret rites, right, is have wild orgies. Love feast, get it? And they said that Christians practiced incest because they're at these love feasts with their brothers and sisters. Oh, and as for the feast part of it, what the Christians actually are eating and drinking is human flesh and human blood, making us cannibalistic, incestuous sex maniacs. With these rumors going around, that's what a lot of people thought of us. So the apologists stepped forward and said, whoa, 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 hold the phone. That isn't what Christians believe, and it's not what we do. Here is what Christians do. And so the apologists, in describing what Christians actually did, give us a precious glimpse into Christian thought and practice in the earliest church, which is every bit as fascinating as you'd expect it to be. The apologists also at times went on the attack and argued that not only are Christians not unethical, we're actually more ethical than our pagan neighbors, because compare our sacred books with theirs, with these myths about the gods. We have a God who is loving and merciful and just, who saves us from our sins and teaches men how to live well. And you compare that with Zeus, who can't even keep his robe on, or the other gods on Mount Olympus, who only seem to notice mankind when they're using us to score points in one of their unending petty feuds. So, as I said, Justin Martyr is one of these apologists of the 2nd century, and I would argue the greatest of the apologists. He wrote a number of works, of which unfortunately only 3 have come down to us. The first 2 are usually entitled his First and Second Apologies, although many scholars think the so-called Second Apology is really just a short appendix to the first, not a separate standalone work. And they're probably right about that. There are a lot of fine and easily accessible translations out there if you'd like to read them yourself. I'll put a link in the show notes down below. I would especially recommend checking out Justin's description of the Mass toward the end of the First Apology. And the date on the First Apology, by the way, is around the year Polycarp was killed, around AD 155-156. And what's fascinating is that all the parts of the Mass Justin describes are still present and recognizable in our masses today, almost 1900 years later. Only, before you run out and buy a copy of his works, be advised that Justin isn't always an easy read. There are passages where he absolutely soars. There's nothing like it. But there are also passages where he's somewhat obscure, sort of involved and professorial. One of the great contributions Justin made, which we still benefit from today, is the application of Greek philosophical terms and methods to the Christian faith. But that also makes some of his arguments kind of difficult to follow if you don't have Greek philosophical training. I think we can forgive Justin for coming across as being a little professorial, though, since he was, in fact, a professor. He had studied a number of the Hellenistic schools of philosophy, and after his conversion to Christianity, he continued to wear his philosopher's robe, and he taught the Christian faith to his students as the one true philosophy. But lest I give you a false impression of Justin as just like a Greek philosopher with a thin Christian wash, let me just say he was deeply, deeply scriptural. And the core of his argument for Christianity rests on a basis of fulfilled prophecy, which he demonstrates with page after page after page of quotations from the Old Testament. Justin's only other surviving work, that is apart from the two apologies, is called The Dialogue with Trypho. And this is one of those ancient dialogues like the dialogues of Plato, which use conversation back and forth to tease out the truth of some matter. The setting is the city of Ephesus, and the disputants are Justin in the Christian corner, and Trypho, who is a Hellenistic Jew. Actually, a refugee, lately fled from the Holy Land to escape the Bar Kokhba revolt, which makes the year of the debate, not necessarily the year that it was written down, but the setting of the debate between Justin and Trypho in the early mid-130s AD. And Justin and Trypho go back and forth for over 140 chapters on whether the Old Testament is understood correctly by the Christians or the Jews, and whether Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah spoken of by the prophets or not. It's a fun read, but it isn't anywhere close to a boxing match, really. They do take the occasional swipe at each other, but on the whole they're astonishingly courteous, and they actually part friends at the end of the dialogue. Now, right at the beginning, there's this fascinating autobiographical passage about Justin and his conversion. Trypho asks him about himself, and Justin launches on this explanation, this kind of testimony as to how he became a Christian. So, Justin was actually born in the Holy Land, in Samaria, and grew up there in the Greek city of Flavia Neapolis, which is near the site of ancient Shechem. Actually, I've been there. And he was sent off to school, presumably at Ephesus, which is where he acquired his philosophical training. And he tells us that no matter which school of philosophy he studied, there was something missing. He wasn't satisfied spiritually. The Platonists came the closest, especially their teaching about trying to contemplate God with your mind's eye. And so he became a Platonist. And one day this young Platonist walked down to the seashore to do precisely what the Platonists recommend, right? To try to clear his mind of worldly clutter and fix it on the eternal. And there he happens to run into this old man who struck up a conversation with him about God and the things of God, kind of a dialogue within the dialogue. And it turns out this old man was a Christian. And we never learn his name, but this short conversation utterly changed Justin's life. And through him, the lives of Christians everywhere. I mean, what a ripple effect, the conversion of St. Justin Martyr. And it kind of makes you think about some of the chance encounters down through history and some of the chance encounters you may have had from time to time, and how God uses us as his instruments to bring others to knowledge of him. You never know what one of your conversations might end in and the number of lives that might be affected. So that's the famous account of Justin's conversion that we find in his writings, and justly one of the most famous testimonies to come down to us from the early church. But there's another place where Justin talks about his conversion, This one, a brief passage in his second apology. And he says, "When I was reveling in the teachings of Plato, I heard the Christians being slandered. But I watched them, fearless in the face of death and every terror, and I knew it was impossible that they were involved in sinful pleasures." So this is fascinating. Justin had seen Christians being martyred, and he saw the bravery of these men and women and their refusal to violate their principles even in the face of certain death, which made the accusations he had heard against Christians seem utterly absurd. As he goes on to say, if Christians are a bunch of cannibal hedonists, wouldn't they do or say anything to stay alive so that they could go back to their pleasures? I think we have to say that Justin, who will himself go on to be martyred, became a Christian at least in part because of the witness of the martyrs, because on their faces, as they strode fearlessly to their death, this young Platonist saw reflected the face of Jesus Christ. Now I want to turn to the Acts of Justin and his companions, which is the account of his martyrdom. But first, a word on the circumstances. Now, Justin was born in Flavia Neapolis in the Holy Land, and he went on to Ephesus, which is where he met Trypho and where he had some schooling and became a Christian. From there, he eventually moved on to Rome, where he rented an apartment, and that's where he met with his students and wrote his apologies, and he kind of had a little Christian philosophical school there. But another part of being a philosopher in antiquity and today was you engage in public debate with philosophers of other schools, with which Justin also did. And he happened to debate a cynic. That's one of the philosophical schools. So Justin debated a cynic by the name of Crescens. And Justin just really embarrassed the guy and showed he didn't know the first thing of what he was talking about. And so Justin actually writes in his second apology that he was probably going to be reported to the authorities. And indeed he was, along with some of his friends. And amazingly, the transcript of their hearing before the Roman prefect has come down to us. That's what the Acts of Justin and his companions is. It's the court records with just sort of a short introduction and conclusion tacked on at either end. So what you're about to hear is the stenographer's notes of what actually happened. It begins with Justin and his companions being led into court, and the prefect, a man named Rusticus, begins to question them. And amazingly, we actually know who this prefect is, Quintus Junius Rusticus, a Stoic philosopher and a tutor to the emperor Marcus Aurelius. It's kind of fitting that Justin Martyr should be given the crown of martyrdom by a fellow philosopher, and even one who was very highly thought of by Marcus Aurelius. He mentions him in a number of his works. Also, I should mention, the year this all happened was AD 165, 10 years after the martyrdom of Polycarp. So Rusticus begins by questioning Justin, since it was apparent that he was the leader of this motley crew. There were 7 of them in all, 6 men and a woman. At least one was a slave. As we'll see, many were foreigners. So Rusticus asked Justin, "What sort of life do you lead?" And Justin said, "A blameless one," which I sort of like. And he says, "without condemnation in the eyes of anyone." And Rusticus asks him about the beliefs of Christianity. And so Justin gives a short summary of his teaching. Prefect Rusticus said, "What belief do you mean?" Justin said, "The belief that we piously hold regarding the God of the Christians, who we believe to be the sole fashioner of the world from the beginning, and also regarding Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was foretold by the prophets as the one who was to come down to mankind as a herald of salvation and a teacher of good doctrines. What I am saying is insignificant when measured against his Godhead." That really is it in a nutshell. I mean, you see there a very clear statement of the deity of Christ, and also an emphasis on his advent being foretold by the prophets, which is classic Justin. Next, Rusticus tries to get Justin to tell him where the Christians meet, but Justin just kind of deflects, and he instead answers the question that he wishes Rusticus would have asked, and he tells him, where he lives, where his apartment is, and that's where he meets with his students. And oh, by the way, anybody who wants to come by and learn about the words of truth is invited. Rusticus is now getting a little impatient, and he finally asks Justin point blank, "You do admit, then, that you are a Christian?" And Justin looks him right in the eye and says, "Yes, I am a Christian." Then Rusticus turns to Justin's companions. And here, I'm going to read a long section to you. What's striking to me is that it's so prosaic. It's like answering the teller at the DMV, right? Only realize, every time you hear one of these people admit to being a Christian, they know they're going to die. Prefect Rusticus said, "Keraton, are you a Christian too?" Keraton said, "I am, by God's command." Prefect Rusticus said to Kerato, and this is the one woman of the bunch, "And what say you, Kerato?" Kerato said, "I am a Christian by the gift of God." Prefect Rusticus said to Evelpistus, "And what are you?" Evelpistus said, "I too am a Christian, and share in the same hope." Prefect Rusticus said to Hierax, "Are you a Christian?" Hierax said, "Yes, I am, worshiping the same God." Prefect Rusticus said, "Did Justin make you a Christian?" Hierax said, "I have long been a Christian." Paeon, cleverly changing the subject, arose and spoke, "I am a Christian also." Rusticus said, "Who instructed you?" Paeon said, "I received it from my parents." Evelpistus said, "I listened gladly to the teaching of Justin, but my Christianity I received from my parents." Rusticus said, "Where are your parents?" Evelpistus said, "In Cappadocia." Prefect Rusticus said to Hierax, "Where are your parents?" Hierax said, "They're dead. It is a considerable time since I was dragged off from Phrygia." Prefect Rusticus said to Liberian, "You're not a Christian too, are you?" Liberian said, "Yes, I too am a devout Christian." So that's it. All these men and one woman are going to die. Signed in triplicate. It's almost kind of banal when you read the minutes back afterwards, but imagine the cold, clammy hands, the knotted stomachs, and the thoughts of mothers and fathers and spouses and children they would never see again in life. And yet, not a single one of these Christians backed down. One by one, they all confessed Christ. Before he passes sentence, Rusticus turns back to Justin to satisfy a point he's curious about. The prefect said to Justin, "If you are scourged and beheaded, do you believe that you will ascend to heaven?" Justin said, "I expect so, from my endurance, if I do endure. Indeed, I know that those who lead a just life abide until the conflagration." Prefect Rusticus said, "You think then that you will ascend?" Justin said, "I do not think, I know." Prefect Rusticus said, "If you do not obey, you will be punished." Justin said, "We are convinced that after we are punished, we will be saved." Prefect Rusticus passed judgment. Those who have refused to sacrifice to the gods are to be scourged and executed in accordance with the laws. And that is the end of the minutes. Justin and his companions were led out, scourged, and finally beheaded, confessing Christ to the end. And as impressive and important as Justin's apologies are, with all their careful reasoning and philosophical rigor and biblical argumentation, the most compelling words Justin spoke on behalf of our faith were these: "Yes, I am a Christian." Let all of us who pursue lives of scholarship strive to live up to his example. Thanks for watching.